Bonjour à tous.
A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We'd like to open this morning's ceremony by inviting some young people, some children, to read some poetry for us. We believe that all the work that we are doing is done for future generations. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Elena from Senegal and France to read a poem for us.
Afrique, mon Afrique.
Africa, my Africa, Africa of proud warriors in ancestral savannas, Africa of whom my grandmother sings. I have never known you, but your blood flows in my veins, your beautiful black blood that irrigates the fields, the blood of your sweat, the sweat of your work, the work of your slavery, the slavery of your children. Africa, tell me, Africa, is this your back that is unbent, the back that never breaks under the weight of humiliation, this back trembling with red scars, and saying no to the whip under the midday sun? But a grave voice answers me, impetuous child, that tree young and strong, that tree over there, splendidly alone amidst white and faded flowers. That is your Africa, springing up anew, springing up patiently, obstinately, whose fruit bit by bit acquires the bitter taste of liberty. The interpreters point out that these are approximative translations of the poetry, but we also encourage you to listen to the beauty of the original.
Thank you very much. We'll now give the floor to Sophie, who's from the Russian Federation.
Каждое лицо – это чудо.
Each face is a miracle. A black child with dark skin and dark eyes, with curly or crinkly hair, is a child. A white child with pink skin, with blue or green eyes, with light, smooth hair, is a child. Both one and the other, black and white, have the same smile. And when a hand caresses their face, when we look upon them with love and speak with them with tenderness, they shed the same tears if we aggrieve them, if we do them harm. But there are no two absolutely identical faces. Each face is a miracle because it is unique. Two faces may be similar, but they can never be unique, and that is the miracle of life.
Merci, Sophie.
Thank you, Sophie. We'll now give the floor to Mateo. He's from Colombia. Rise to birth with me, my brother. Give me your hand from the depths of your pain. You won't come back from the depths of the rocks. You won't come back from subterranean time. It won't come back, your enraged voice. They won't come back, your pierced eyes. Rise to birth with me, my brother. Look at me from the depths of earth. Cottager, weaver, silent pastor, tamer of totemic guanacos, mason of the daring platform, water boy of the Andes tears, jeweler of the smashed fingers, farmer trembling in the seed, potter wasted in your clay. Bring to the cup of this new life your old buried pains. Rise to birth with me, my brother. Show me your blood and your furrow. Tell me, here I was punished, because the jewel did not shine, or the earth did not deliver in time, the stone or the grain. Show me the rock where you felt, and the wood where you were crucified. Light with the old flints, the ancient lamps, the whips stuck in your wounds through centuries, and the axes of bloody shine. I came to speak through your dead mouth. Through the land, unite the silent lips, and from the depths speak to me this long night, as though I were with you, anchored. Tell me everything, chain by chain, link by link, step by step. Sharpen the knives that you kept. Put them in my chest and in my hand, like a river of yellow rays, like a river of buried tigers, and leave me to cry hours, days, years, blind ages, stellar centuries. Give me the silence, water, hope. Give me light. Welcome your blood and your words. This is by Pablo Neruda.
Merci.
Thank you. We'll now give the floor to our fellows who are part of this year's program.
Good morning. My name is Violeta Danoa, and I represent the United States. And I'm also representing the 2017 Fellows for the Program for People of African Descent.
Hello, my name is Juliet Balanta Zúñiga. I am from Colombia, and I also am in the program for people of African descent.
Hello, my name is Chinelo Njaka, and I'm also on the UN program, UN Fellows Program for People of African Descent, and I'm from the United States, and I'm representing Great Britain.
We will be reading Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I rise.
Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I got gold oil wells pumping in my living room, just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hopes springing high, still I rise. Did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? Does my haughtiness often offend you? Don't you tired awful heart? 'Cause I love like I got gold mines, digging in my own backyard. You may show me with your words. You may call me with your eyes. You may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise.
Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean, leaping and wide. Welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise. I rise. I rise.
High Commissioner, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, representatives of civil society organizations, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and warm welcome to the two-day regional meeting for Europe, Central Asia and North America on the International Decade for People of African Descent. With this beautiful poetic start of the meeting, which I'm confident resonated in our souls, I now have the honor to welcome the High Commissioner and invite him to deliver his opening statement. High Commissioner, you have the floor.
Thank you, Yuri. Excellencies, distinguished panelists, participants, colleagues, and friends, a good morning to all of you. It is an honor to be among you this morning and to open this meeting devoted to the rights of people of African descent. Across Europe, Central Asia, and North America, people of African descent continue to endure pervasive discrimination in law and in practice, extending from neighborhoods and schools to workplaces, political representation, and justice, whether they are descendants of the victims of slavery brought to North America and Europe against their will, or more recent migrants. People of African descent are frequently denied rights and experience exclusion, humiliation, and impoverishment as a result of racial discrimination. As the Universal Declaration of Human Rights reminds us, all human beings are born equal in dignity and rights. There can be absolutely no justification whatsoever for the multiple and overlapping forms of discrimination which give women of African descent access to lower quality health care and offer children of African descent poorer education in substandard schools, which deprive both men and women of African descent of an equal chance of decent employment, which destine a disproportionate number of people of African descent to a marginalized existence characterized by poverty and violence. And yet, across the regions of Europe, Central Asia, and North America, expert missions by the Working Group on People of African Descent and related working groups, the Special Rapporteur on Racism, the Special Rapporteur on Minorities, CERD, and experts from the European and inter-American regional bodies have found extensive, sharply etched, and deeply rooted discrimination in laws, policies, practices, and institutions. In the United States of America, with the largest population of people of African descent in this regional grouping, inequalities generated by generations of slavery and legal segregation endure, despite the achievements of the civil rights movement and the subsequent changes in the legal framework. People of African descent continue to face disproportionate poverty, unequal services, and even significantly lower average life expectancy. Women of African descent have unequal access to health services, leading to sharp inequalities in health outcomes for women and young children. I have also voiced my concern over practices of racial profiling and patterns of police violence in the United States, as well as the disproportionate imposition of capital punishment on people of African descent and other racial minorities. It is heartening to see people standing up for their human rights. In this context, I note and commend the leadership of the Black Lives Matter movement in bringing attention to human rights violations. And I join its call for full accountability of police forces in all countries. I also note serious concerns about systemic anti-black racism in the Canadian criminal justice system, including evidence of extensive patterns of racial profiling by law enforcement. I have spoken widely about my deep concerns regarding widespread discrimination against minorities across many European countries. In several countries, patterns of discrimination against people of African descent extend from education and substandard schools that feature offensive stereotyping and bullying by teachers and other children to unequal health care and grossly unfair employment and housing practices. In multiple countries across Europe and Central Asia, heightened hostility towards people who are perceived to be foreigners or migrants is also having an increasing impact on people of African descent, including rising incidents of hate crimes and violence. As in North America, I'm deeply concerned about discrimination in access to justice, treatment by police, and throughout justice systems. Racial profiling by law enforcement officials is widespread, with very disproportionate numbers of people of African descent being stopped by police in a number of countries, according to multiple studies. A first step to tackle discrimination is to listen to the experiences of those who have been marginalized. Yet in numerous European countries, people of African descent remain underrepresented in the media, let alone in political life. Their daily life, history, and identity are largely erased from the national narrative and history books, and to some extent also from national cultural identity, despite the prominence of writers, thinkers, and creators of African descent in every country. As a student of history, I also deplore the widespread failure in many countries to acknowledge the reality and legacy of the slave trade and subsequent colonial exploitation of Africa, including in terms of their contributions to the prosperity of many in the richer countries in the world. It is important to speak the truth about the past in order to be able to see clearly what is happening in the present. And it is essential to acknowledge the presence of every child and adult who is part of a society's unfolding story. Excellencies, friends, discrimination is the deepest, most comprehensive obstruction to a human being's rights. Its scars on individuals and generations run deep. But discrimination also harms all of society. It deepens mistrust, casting suspicion on all sides and tearing apart the social fabric. It creates grievances which corrode every sense of belonging and shared values. It is urgent and important that such forces be turned around, both for the sake of the individuals concerned and for the values and vitality of the countries in which we live. The International Decade for People of African Descent is about taking down the walls between communities and empowering every member of every society to live their lives free from inequality and prejudice. We, all human beings, are equal and therefore should enjoy an equal right to dignity. We can only ever create just and peaceful societies for all when nobody is subjected to the dishonor of prejudice and segregation. Because every country in the world needs to be able to draw on the skills and contributions of every member. Because inclusion builds truly strong societies, societies that are strong because they are fair. Seeking an end to the injustice and humiliation of discrimination is at the core of my mandate and the work of my office. We are developing strategies that support the decade, empowering people of African descent, enabling recognition of their rights, and helping to achieve justice. Our work includes supporting national efforts to enhance the rights of people of African descent, a fellowship program, the provision of small grants to communities, in addition to reporting on various thematic aspects of racial discrimination suffered by people of African descent. The UN system is also seeking to raise awareness and spark concrete action. But we can and will do better in the next 7 years of the decade. Our advocacy needs to become more powerful, our guidance more specific and persuasive, and we must increase the involvement of people of African descent themselves in our actions to implement the decade and end discrimination. I look forward to fruitful discussions over the next 2 days. I assure you that my office and I will continue to voice our concerns and to advocate for and assist in building state policies and practices which uphold the equal rights of all people. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, High Commissioner. We now proceed to the first item of the day, and that is to appoint the chairperson and rapporteur of the regional meeting. Following the pre-sessional consultations and taking into account the important role of the Intergovernmental Working Group on the Effective Implementation of the Durban Declaration and Programme of Action, and the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination in the implementation of the Programme of Activities for the decade, we are glad to announce that the regional meeting will be chaired by Ambassador Her Excellency Ms. Yvette Stevens, Chairperson of the Intergovernmental Working Group. We're also happy to announce that Ms. May McDougall, member of the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, has accepted to be the rapporteur of the regional meeting. I invite Ambassador Stevens and Ms. McDougall to the podium.
Let me first thank you, OECHR, for the confidence you have bestowed on me to chair this meeting. It is indeed an honor for me to do so. Before we proceed with the opening ceremony, I would like to inform that the list of speakers for the panel discussion is open. I invite delegations and civil society organizations wishing to take the floor during the panel discussions, in particular the first one on recognition, which I'll be moderating, to register at the list of speakers desk to my left. I kindly ask delegations taking the floor on behalf of regional and other groups to indicate so when registering. We will now continue with opening ceremony, and it is my pleasure to invite Ms. Opal Tometi, co-founder of Black Lives Matter and executive director of the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, to deliver her statement.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, High Commissioner. I truly appreciate the opportunity to share among my peers in civil society and representatives of member states about the trends, priorities, challenges of promoting and protecting the human rights of people of African descent. Before I begin, I would like to ask that all who believe that every single Black life matters will join me in a moment of silence to recognize the 26 Nigerian migrant girls who lost their lives in the Mediterranean Sea earlier this month. So a moment of silence, please. Thank you. I appreciate each of you taking a moment to acknowledge the tragedy that all too regularly befalls many African migrants in the West. During my remarks today, I will foreground the unique experiences of migrants of African descent because for far too long, these Black lives have been overlooked, they've been disregarded, they've been literally disposable the world over. There is a need to center the most marginalized of Black people amongst us. And what I will share today, this morning, will illustrate that there is a global Black migration crisis. It is expressed in the sheer numbers of all people who are forced to migrate. According to the United Nations, there are 244 million people who are no longer living in their country of origin. This is a 40% increase since the year 2000. It's evidenced not only in this number, but also by the profoundly disturbing, but far too often deplorable and inhumane conditions that migrants of African descent face. The fact that for years, nearly 5,000 migrants die in the Mediterranean Sea each year is horrific. The Mediterranean Sea is a mass grave. For civil society organizations that work with Black communities, we are painfully aware that a significant share of those people who die there are Africans attempting to reach Europe. They've been forced to make the frightening yet harrowing journey in order to find
a way to provide for themselves and for their loved ones. What often doesn't get discussed, though, is the root causes of migration. In this case, entire economies have been distorted because the European Union trade deals with West African states. They're dumping cheap goods and flooding agricultural markets, making it impossible for indigenous African industries to survive. These policies leave West Africans in dire poverty. It'll be short-sighted and negligent to have a conversation in rooms like this without raising the catastrophe that is global capitalism, as evidenced in these types of devastating economic policies, structural adjustment programs, and so on. We must lift up these aspects because these are economic mechanisms that impact the quality of life for Black people, regardless of their nation of origin, and because our destinies are intertwined and our communities are interdependent. Recently, members of the larger international community have turned their attention to the enslavement of African migrants in Libya. People are literally being auctioned off in 2017. Sadly, this has been going on for quite some time, but it's heartening to see that the international community has come to decry the degradation and this violence. Rallies in the last few days in cities like Paris and New York City are evidence that this barbaric behavior will no longer be tolerated. It must also be said that European countries like France have emboldened and enabled this behavior. In July 2017, French President Emmanuel Macron announced that France will engage Libya to help in its processing of asylum claims for Africans before they even reach the shores of France. This notion is appalling and illustrative of France's complicity in the crisis of slavery in Libya. It's true. To be clear, Black people are displaced, they're exploited, they're criminalized, they're demonized, and deemed disposable. This is both state-sanctioned and also enshrined into the cultural fabric of societies all across Europe, the Americas, and Asia. In the US-American context, we've seen this expressed in many ways, including the brutal assault of a Muslim Somali woman in Cleveland, Ohio. Her attacker yelled at her, "Go back to Africa," while beating her. She had to be hospitalized due to her injuries, which included facial fractures and missing teeth. The laws in the US aren't so different. They promote another type of violence, the type that thrusts entire families and communities into precarious situations after already enduring years and years of trauma. We saw the most recent example of this just earlier this week, when the Trump administration decided to terminate 60,000 temporary protective status visas for Haitian migrants, who are essentially refugees of the 2010 earthquake and the horrible hurricanes that have devastated the nation over the past 2 years, not to even mention the pandemic of cholera that was ushered in by UN peacekeepers. The Trump administration pulled the rug out from underneath our Black Haitian siblings and have given them about 18 months to, quote unquote, self-deport. This is immoral. It is further unconscionable because these same conditions are what led to the current plight of Haitians across the Americas that many might not even be aware of. So, you're aware, presently there are literally tens of thousands of Haitian migrants who are walking by foot across the Americas, up from Brazil, and making their way to northern parts of the United States and Canada. Many have died on this journey, and some who did make it to the United States were paroled in and given some services and support. However, there are approximately 5,000 more Haitians who've been left at the US-Mexico border and are refused admittance into the United States. And there are now hundreds more who are seeking entrance into Canada because they have now witnessed the resurgence of xenophobic attacks in the United States, and they are seeing the regressive US laws and policies. For the Americas and this part of the hemisphere to see a Black migrant crisis is completely unprecedented. People are used to hearing about non-Black Latinos in the crisis, but the reality is that Black migrants across the Americas are dying. They're being exploited, they're growing ill, and so on. Black immigrant mothers in the US are giving birth to children with the lowest birth weight of any community due to stress of their situations. Haitian immigrant women earn the lowest wages of any immigrant group. Additionally, the Trump administration is making cuts to visas, including cuts to several nations of Africa, including other cuts that will eliminate or potentially eliminate the diversity visa, which has been an important legal migration pathway to West African migrants. The White House is also increasing the military and immigration enforcement budgets by millions and millions of dollars, as well as making plans to build a wall, although one already exists. And to those of us in civil society, we view these types of enforcement measures as a human rights crisis, with so many already dying in the harsh Sonoran deserts of the United States. The climate there is intolerable. Speaking of climate, it's incumbent on me to also share that climate change caused by our states are having an acute impact on Black lives around the globe and are fueling migration. And we need Western states to take responsibility for their consumption and impact on the planet. The Open Society Institute released a study, and its findings showed that 6 out of 10 countries that are worst impacted by climate change are on the African continent. This is terrible, especially given the fact that we know that these nations aren't causing the issue, but they are the main ones experiencing the effect. Now, lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't close my remarks by uplifting the courageous Black activists and everyday people in the United States who've been thrust into the human rights movement for racial justice and economic equity. You've seen them in the streets of Ferguson, you've seen them in Charlottesville, pushing back against the white supremacist insurgency, but you've also seen them as they fought courageously to stop the extrajudicial killings of unarmed Black people. Right now, it seems that Black people are being profiled and attacked for having the audacity to assert their humanity, for raising their voices, for kneeling, for protesting the brutalization and extrajudicial killing of Black people at the hands of police. It's widely known that a movement under the moniker of Black Lives Matter has swept the United States and garnered international attention. In fact, just earlier this month, the Global Black Lives Matter Network received the Sydney Peace Prize for our contributions to the struggle for racial justice. And it's also widely known by civil society, rational governments, and people of conscience that the movement is rooted in peace and seeks to end the war on Black lives. However, in the United States, the Federal Bureau of Investigation has chosen to criminalize our social movements. Instead of using time and resources to investigate and stop the rise of white supremacist hate groups, they instead have sought to suppress the necessary dissent of Black activists and their allies. The new term that has emerged from the FBI is called Black Identity Extremists, BIE, as it's been coined. and the plan is to target Black people who engage in social justice and human rights activism. However, we've seen this before. It's been known before as the Counterintelligence Program, and it had undermined Black organizations and our progress in the United States. Now, as terrifying as the revival of these types of FBI efforts are, we can't stop standing up for justice. And Black activists in the US are calling on the international community to condemn this administration's attempt to suppress us, to demonize us, to incarcerate us, and possibly worse. We need member states to take the United Nations Decade for People of African Descent seriously, to resource it as a vehicle for justice for Black lives, and help ensure that members of civil society can convene, draft a declaration, uplift the acute needs of our communities, and ultimately create a permanent forum for people of African descent. We are all entitled to a life of dignity, justice, and joy. Anything that impedes the realization of any of our rights is an affront to our collective humanity. And it is our duty to continue to push for healthy democracies that work for all of us. Democracies that protect and affirm the rights of all Black lives. And each and every one of us are critical to achieving that goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Meti. I invite you to join us at the podium. It is now my pleasure to invite Mr. Sabelo Gumedzi, chairperson of the Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent, to address the meeting. Mr. Gumedzi, you have the floor, sir.
High Commissioner for Human Rights, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to address you as the chairperson of the Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent. I'm delighted that this regional meeting for Europe, Central Asia, and North America is taking place with the presence of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. The Office of the United Nations Human Rights Commissioner for Human Rights represents the world's commitment to universal ideals of human dignity. As a promoter and protector of all human rights, the High Commissioner's contribution in this regional meeting is most welcome and appreciated. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, 3 years ago, the General Assembly, in its resolution 68 of 237, proclaimed the International Decade for People of African Descent with the theme, People of African Descent, Recognition, Justice and Development. As the Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent, we welcomed this resolution and looked forward to a meaningful contribution to addressing issues faced by people of African descent. Indeed, the proclamation of the decade provided a timely and unique opportunity for us to focus our attention to the contribution made by people of African descent in many parts of the world. Furthermore, the decade opened another window of opportunity for us to propose concrete measures and to promote equality and to combat racism, racial discrimination, Afrophobia, xenophobia, and related intolerance. Allow me to underscore the objective of this regional meeting as part of the implementation of the International Decades Program of activities. The main purpose of this regional meeting is to provide an opportunity to reflect on ways and means that the governments from Europe, Central Asia, North America, in partnership with equality bodies, national human rights institutions, civil society, development agencies, and regional organizations may pursue to integrate the provisions of the programs of activities in their policies, programs, and strategies tailored for people of African descent. Thus far, the Working Group on People of African Descent has noted with comfort the celebration of the launch of the International Decade by various states within some regions. We encourage states who have not celebrated the launch of the International Decade to do so as part of educating their populations and bringing awareness on the importance of the International Decade. Celebrating the launch of the International Decade is just as good. The actual work, however, lies in the development of national programs of action and activities for the full implementation of the decade. In our assessment as the Working Group of Experts, more efforts are still required. The International Decade is more than just an acknowledgement of the respect of the right to equality and non-discrimination. States must ensure that people of African descent fully enjoy their economic, social, cultural, and civil and political rights. Furthermore, states must ensure the full and equal participation of people of African descent in all aspects of society. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the implementation of the program of activities for the implementation of the International Decade cannot be achieved by states alone. The Working Group of Experts values the contribution made by equality bodies, national human rights institutions, civil society, development agencies, and regional organizations in promoting human rights in general. Bearing in mind that people of African descent make up some of the most marginalized groups and that they are a specific victim group and therefore deserve special attention with the assistance of the above-mentioned role players. As deliberations take place in this regional meeting, I wish to remind you that it all started in Durban in 2001. The Durban Declaration and Program of Action cannot be divorced from the program of activities of the implementation of the International Decade for People of African Descent. The DDPA provides the context to which this meeting is all about. The International Decade presents a viable instrument to address common issues facing people of African descent, such as the following: structural and institutional racial discrimination, xenophobia, Afrophobia and related intolerance, inequality, marginalization and stigmatization, low levels of participation and underrepresentation in political and institutional decision-making processes, lack of adequate representation in the administration of justice, barriers to and inequality in the enjoyment of key human rights such as access to equality, education, health services, housing, which result in the intergenerational transmission of poverty, disproportionate presence in prison populations, racial profiling, limited social recognition and valuing of people of African descent, ethnic and cultural diversity and contribution to society, and intolerance against religions of African origin. It is the Working Group's firm belief that during this meeting, these issues will be discussed and best practices addressing some of these challenges faced by people of African descent will be shared. For instance, some states have taken an initiative to apologize and paid reparations where appropriate for grave and massive violations committed against people of African descent. The discussions on reparations cannot be overemphasized. Once again, the working group welcomes the focus of the International Decade for People of African Descent on recognition, justice, and development. These themes are critical to the successful implementation of the International Decade. Action is needed to address the extreme violence, racial bias, and hate speech which people of African descent continue to face in these regions. We must urgently address the root causes of racial discrimination in an honest debate about the history and its connection to modern-day racism. This meeting represents an important moment, and we can make a difference. Your Excellencies, distinguished representatives, ladies and gentlemen, in closing, I would like to reiterate the working group's commitment to supporting all efforts geared towards the implementation of the International Decade for People of African Descent. I thank you for your attention.
And I thank you, Mr. Gumetse. Please join us on the podium. We are running very tight for time, so I would like to appeal to the next speakers to keep within the 7-minute limit, if you do not mind. Thank you. Let me now invite Ms. Anastasia Krikli, Chairperson of the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, to deliver her statement. Madam, you have the podium. Thank you.
Push the black button. Have I taken the floor? Good. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Ambassador. It's not a good idea to ask an Irish person to stop talking, but I will do the best I can. And first of all, let me say that the work of the Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and I'm very glad to be here with you this morning, because our work makes it very clear that the legacies of slavery and colonialism are still alive and awful in the lives of people of African descent globally. We are clear about this in virtually all of our communications and all of the work that we undertake. So it's my honor, on behalf of my colleagues, to be here this morning with you and with the High Commissioner to say a few words at this opening session. I'm glad to be here to stand in solidarity with you all as a mature, I'll say, rather than old, white woman, and also, I think, as one who has some small understanding of the legacies of colonialism, even if experienced in quite a different way in the country that I come from. I'm particularly glad, though, to stand here as the chair of the Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination during this very important event, the second regional conference organised in the context of the International Decade for People of African Descent. The elimination of racial discrimination against people of African descent is not mentioned or was not focused on in the development of the Convention for the Elimination, the International Convention for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination back in the 60s, when that term was very little, if at all, used. But the definition of racial discrimination in that convention, which talks about racism on purpose or in effect, I think is very relevant for your discussions. If you look to the way in which measures deemed to be neutral, in effect, are racist, as indeed our good friend from Black Lives Matter has already made very clear to us. The concerns about people of African descent were very present, though, and the concerns about Africans were very, very present when the convention was adopted unanimously in December 1965 and when it came into force in 1969. If you think back to that period and the horrors of apartheid in South Africa and some of the other struggles that were going on globally during that time. We're glad to say in CERD that there has been some progress, But I think it's really important for us to acknowledge here this morning that today's global toxic discourse threatens the progress that has been made to eliminate racial discrimination and requires, I believe, all of our vigilance, including your vigilance and courage, in naming racism and racial discrimination for what it is, wherever you see it, and whoever or whatever is perpetuating it. I'm very conscious also that the economic and social initiatives necessary for real equality, where equality in legislation was somewhat granted, that those economic, social and cultural initiatives, what we in CERD call special measures, simply did not happen or have been reversed, and in effect are now causing wider and wider differentials, and I would suggest creating conditions for further and more egregious structural inequalities for people of African descent in a number of countries globally. As my good friend from the working group has pointed out, the Durban process, the Declaration and Programme of Action, raised the visibility of people of African descent and has contributed to a substantive advancement in the promotion and protection of your rights. In proclaiming this decade, I believe that the international community recognised clearly the particular human rights of people of African descent. And our committee, I'm glad to say, has been actively involved in the decade's related activities since the beginning, including through participation in the first regional meeting for Latin America and the Caribbean, which took place in December 2015. The committee has also taken other action in support of the decade and in support of your rights. 2011 marked International Year for People of African Descent. And the committee set out to have an interactive dialogue aiming towards a better understanding of the causes and consequences of the racial discrimination experienced by people of African descent. And as a consequence of that, in the same year, CERD adopted a general recommendation number 34 on racial discrimination against people of African descent. And what this means for us, it may sound pedantic and slow, but what this means for us is that every single country that comes before us is asked what measures they are taking and what initiatives they are taking and how to diminish and eliminate racial discrimination against people of African descent. And also we ask them what measures they are taking in support of the decade. I believe that the objectives of the decade are very important: recognition, justice and development. And indeed, colleagues have already spoken eloquently to them, so I won't repeat it. I also believe the continued vigilance of groups and committees like our own is important, and if you look at our concluding observations over the last while, you will find that in addition to our ongoing concerns as raised, we have raised particular matters with a number of countries, including the USA, Denmark, France, Portugal and Oman in the recent past. But I'm also conscious that this decade is an important vehicle for awareness raising. For awareness raising about the complexities of intersectionality and the way in which, as the High Commissioner has already pointed out, the racial discrimination experienced by women and by women of African descent represents an intersectional and egregious form of discrimination that can't be addressed unless it's specifically named. And I urge you to ensure that that happens in your work. I'm also conscious that the legacies of slavery and colonization are evident in other ways also. Not least recently in the articulations of white supremacist marches seen in the USA, which the highest office holder of the land, by not denying, in effect supported and created conditions for more of the same. And this indeed was the subject of a statement by the Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination during August. I'm also very conscious of the way in which colonizers and colonized are being subjected to migration processes that can only be seen to be delivering the conditions for racism and racial discrimination, and which in themselves need ongoing and continuous scrutiny. in many parts of the world. And in saying that, I know attention has already been drawn to those policies and their implications in this part of the world, but in CERD, we're also conscious of the implications of those policies for people of African descent and for everyone experiencing racial discrimination in other parts of the world, both in the global north and in the global south. In conclusion, you may know that our committee is sitting in its 94th session here in Geneva. So I'm very sorry that I cannot be with you for the rest of the session. But we've made a very clear commitment to you and to your work by facilitating Gay MacDougall, who will be your rapporteur, Vereen Shepherd, who will be with you tomorrow for some of the panels, and Pastor Marila Martinez, who will be with you today, to be absent from our work and to be with you as a gesture of our support and ongoing commitment to what you're doing here and to what you will continue to do, so that, in effect, the racial discrimination that we all stand against can be eliminated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Keighley. Can you please join us at the podium? It is now my pleasure to invite Ms. Rokaya Diallo, French journalist and activist, to address this meeting. Ms. Diallo, you have the floor, madam.
Good morning. Bonjour à tous.
A very good morning, everybody. I'll be speaking in my language, in French. I'd like to thank the United Nations for having organized this meeting, which is giving us an opportunity to talk about essential issues. $400. $400. That is how much it costs to buy a black man and to reduce him to slavery today. A CNN report managed to upset the sensitive souls for a short time, just for a short time, because this quickly became yesterday's news, and those sensitive souls quickly and comfortably forgot that in 2017, you just need several hundred euros to be able to call yourself an owner of a human being, for the simple reason that that person is black. If these human beings are sold, it's because they're migrants. They're in a vulnerable situation just because they would like to enjoy their freedom of movement, which is nonetheless guaranteed by Article 13 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Since 2000, almost 30,000 migrants, men and women and children, largely black people and Africans, have died trying to reach European borders. 30,000 people have died just trying to enjoy their right to freedom of movement. The Mediterranean Sea, where some of us like to dip our toes on holiday, has actually become an open grave, an open mass grave. But as part of curbing immigration, the European states, including France, are prepared to look the other way. They're prepared to mobilize more funds, to spend more money to ensure the false sense of security of their borders, rather than spending that money on ensuring the survival of people who are desperately trying to reach their coasts. The sums spent to guarantee the impermeability of the borders, which of course is impossible anyway, is appalling when you look at the amount of money that's spent on stopping these people dying. 5,000 people we see die every year before us. These people include women who are almost all exposed to sexual violence. All statements given by women migrants talk about sexual violence and sexual abuse. Children as well. Children do not benefit from the protection that is theirs under international texts. These children are forced to undergo rigorous tests because it's not believed that these tall, strong black people can actually be children, and that they can actually enjoy the the innocence of childhood. Because of the color of their skin, they become suspects, and they no longer have the protection afforded to them, or they no longer enjoy the protection afforded to them under international texts. Today, I'd like to be the spokesperson, if you will, for a coalition of activists from different European organizations here today. And we've a list of proposals for you. Well, in fact, they're not proposals, they're demands, really. One of them is calling upon the United Nations to hold states accountable for police brutality, police violence, which becomes a corollary to impunity. This issue, the issue of impunity and police violence, is intrinsically linked to migrants who are constantly hounded, particularly victims of African descent. They're the main victims of police brutality. Ori Jallow, burnt alive. Mark Duggan, fatally shot. Adama Traoré, suffocated. Sandra Bland, hung in a prison cell. The Kabula slaughter, 12 people killed, targeted by 500 bullets fired by soldiers, rather. I could spend the rest of the day listing the names of victims of African descent of police violence in Germany, the United Kingdom, in France, in the United States, in Brazil, and in many other countries, indeed. A large part of the racism prevalent in our societies is directly produced by states, particularly through police violence, which is targeted both at foreigners and at nationals. This is state racism, which I denounce as such, even though states would contest that, because it is produced by institutions and because states are not putting in place the measures to put an end to it. Rather, they are imperiling the lives of hundreds of citizens. In France, for example, when we're young and when we're seen to be Arab or black, you're 20 times more likely to be checked rather than when you're not. 80% of people who die at the hands of police are young people from poor neighborhoods. They're either black or Arab. It's vital today that in all countries, people recognize the institutional nature of racism inherited from the colonial past, from slavery, and the practices created at that time. These countries need to put in place provisions to dismantle the racist system. I'd also take this opportunity to pay tribute to all activists who, across the world, are fighting against racism on a daily basis. They are often doing this entirely anonymously. They're not able to speak out at a podium like we are. They're not able to speak to the representatives of dozens of countries, and they often are working at the risk of their security and their physical and mental health. But it's thanks to them that we are here, in fact, that we have acquired rights, which are nonetheless insufficient, but they are fighting the good fight for persons of African descent, and I hope that you can applaud them and thank them for their fight. Thank you. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Please do join us here.
We have now heard from our speakers. We are now going to open the general debate, and we will start with member states who wish to make statements. Could you please indicate by putting up your flag? Member states who wish to make statements to this general debate? None? Canada. And then followed by United States. Canada, you have the floor, sir.
Merci.
Thank you. High Commissioner, distinguished delegates, colleagues, my name is Jérôme Moisin. I'm the Director General for Planning, Policy and Research within the Ministry of Canadian Heritage at the Government of Canada. I am in charge of multiculturalism programs and human rights programs. I'm delighted to be with you here at this regional meeting on the Decade of Persons of African Descent. The decade, the International Decade, through the issues of recognition, justice and development, seeks to increase the visibility of persons of African descent while contributing to substantive progress when it comes to promotion and protection of their rights. Through our work in this direction, we've been paying particular attention to those who are dealing with multiple forms of discrimination, which is intersectoral. Canada is governed by a vast legislative framework which recognizes multiculturalism and diversity as fundamental characteristics of Canadian society. This framework sets out the rights and freedoms which apply to all Canadians, including the right to equality, which prevents discrimination, in particular discrimination based on race, national origin, or ethnicity. This is supported by a number of programs and policies and promotes full and equitable participation of people from all origins, seeking to break down obstacles to participation in all spheres of Canadian society in order to develop a diversified and inclusive society. Nonetheless, Canada does recognize that we do not always fully harness the potential of this legislative framework. We've submitted a program for the current mandate, and our government has underlined that Canada's strength lies in its diversity. In actual fact, diversity and inclusion, that's one of the main issues as we celebrate the 105th anniversary of our Confederation this year. We know that we need to do more to reduce inequality in our society and to combat systematic marginalization and racism. Currently, a standing committee within the Chamber of Commerce of Canada is looking at how to set up a cross-government approach to reduce systemic racism and religious discrimination. We are looking forward to the recommendations of this study, as well as we also impatiently looking forward to the opportunity to discuss how to improve the situation of people of African descent in our respective countries over the next 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you, the delegate from Canada. I will now give the floor to this distinguished delegate of the United States. You have the floor, sir, or madam. Sir. Okay.
Thank you, Chairperson. And I would like to welcome the members of civil society participating today, and in particular, thank those from the United States for sharing their Thanksgiving to be here today. The United States welcomes this opportunity to discuss the International Decade for People of African Descent and participate in this important regional meeting. In the United States, we are committed to promoting the enjoyment of human rights as well as racial equality and social inclusion for people of African descent, both domestically and internationally. We would like to highlight some of the steps the United States has been taking in the areas that are the focus of this regional meeting: recognition, justice, and development. In the interest of time, we will limit our interventions to this statement and will take the opportunity now to address the themes the panels will be discussing. In the field of recognition, we support a global effort to promote knowledge of and respect for the cultural heritage and contributions of people of African descent. Since its opening, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, a part of the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., has welcomed nearly 3 million visitors from across the United States and around the world. The museum explores the complete and truthful African American story through thought-provoking exhibitions, extensive artifacts, and interactive education. One of the museum's distinct virtual impacts is the Freedmen's Bureau Transcription Project, which is the largest crowdsourcing initiative the Smithsonian has ever sponsored. It allows individuals to research their family history. The museum also provides professional learning events for the community. In July 2017, the Let's Talk, Reaching Race in the Classroom learning event promoted the fostering of open dialogue surrounding issues of race and racism. In relation to justice, we take seriously our obligations as a state party to the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. Further, we work to ensure that hate crimes are prosecuted, that discriminatory law enforcement conduct is investigated and remedied, and that our laws and programs to ensure fair housing, fair lending, equal educational opportunity, equal employment opportunity, and the right to vote are enjoyed by all, without regard to race, color, descent, or national or ethnic origin. In regards to development, valuing, respecting, and recognizing diversity's contributions to societies is both morally just as well as necessary for sustainable economic growth and prosperity around the world. To achieve shared prosperity and stability, we must empower all members of our societies, including historically marginalized groups, to participate fully in political, social, and economic life. We must be deliberate in ensuring there are ample opportunities to do so. In the United States, we are working to address health disparities domestically among communities with racial and ethnic minority populations. Our Centers for Disease Control's racial and ethnic approaches to community health REACH program explicitly focuses on improving efforts to alleviate chronic diseases for specific racial and ethnic groups in a broad range of urban, rural, and tribal communities where the disease burden is the highest. CDC supports the National Influenza Vaccination Disparities Partnership, the goal of which is to increase influenza vaccination rates among underserved populations, including African Americans and Hispanics. The partnership is a multi-sector partnership spearheaded by community partners who commit to promote the importance of flu vaccination. Work is currently underway to build partnership models of sustainability among health departments, grassroots organizations, and community messengers. By connecting local voices, the partnership is working to disseminate a trusted message to encourage flu vaccination among these populations. Chairperson, we are aware that combating racism and discrimination is not just a domestic issue. It is a challenge every nation faces and one we can all work together to overcome. Our bilateral arrangements in promoting racial and ethnic equality with Colombia, Brazil, and Uruguay, which includes civil society and private sector, are just some of the examples of how we explore best practices to improve racial equality. We are applying what we have learned from action plans. My apologies. From action plans developed through these arrangements to facilitate exchanges and share best practices in diversity and social inclusion throughout the Western Hemisphere. Finally, Chairperson, we would like to reiterate that the United States condemns speech that advocates national, racial, or religious hatred, particularly when it constitutes incitement to violence, discrimination, or hostility. From our own experience and history, the United States remains convinced that the best antidote to offensive speech is not bans and punishment, but a combination of three key elements: robust legal protections against discrimination and hate crimes, proactive government outreach to racial and religious communities, and vigorous protection of freedom of expression, whether it is exercised on or offline. States and public leaders should condemn hate speech when it occurs and should lend support to voices calling for tolerance and inclusion in society for people of all racial backgrounds. Although there are, unfortunately, many manifestations of racial stereotyping and discrimination in the world today, the International Decade for People of African Descent provides an opportunity to do the hard work of challenging the persistent, institutionalized beliefs that are the root of racial discrimination. Our views on the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, as well as the outcome of the Durban Review Conference and its endorsement of overbroad restrictions on freedom of speech and expression, are long-standing and well-known. In conclusion, Chairperson, while we are proud of progress we have made in the United States towards reducing discrimination and ensuring equal opportunity for all, we know we are not yet where we need to be. We know that when all persons are afforded the same treatment under the law and when our societies practice good governance and transparency, we prosper together. We all must continue to speak out on these issues because we know our own history. It is precisely because we are imperfect that we believe it is appropriate for us all to address them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I now give the floor to the delegate from the European Union. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the European Union. The EU has been and continues to be a firm believer in the international fight against all forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia and related intolerance, as well as to the promotion and protection of human rights for all without discrimination on any grounds. The EU strongly believes that the existing normative framework offered by the international and regional human rights instruments, with as its cornerstones the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination and the Durban Declaration and Programme of Action, contains powerful tools to fight racism, racial discrimination and related forms of intolerance worldwide. Priority should be given in this regard to their full and effective implementation. The principles of equality and non-discrimination lie at the core of our founding principles, and the EU has a robust legal and policy framework in place to prevent and to fight discrimination on any grounds and status. Madam Chair, the adoption by consensus by the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 69/16 of the International Decade for People of African Descent and its programme of activities marked another important milestone in the fight against racism, and the EU wishes to reiterate its strong commitment to its successful and effective implementation. It is only through true ownership and engagement of all states that the decade can successfully achieve its objectives. The EU is aware that world events such as the global economic crisis, the European and global refugee and migration crisis, and the rise of extremism have created new tensions, fueled new fears, and in some cases increased existing intolerances. Only yesterday, the High Representative of the European Union, Mrs. Mogherini, and the President of the African Union, Alpha Condé, discussed the terrible reports of inhumane treatment, notably of slavery of migrants in Libya, and expressed their total condemnation of these despicable acts and their firm resolve to ask for a swift action to put an immediate end to these criminal practices, as well as to the trafficking of human beings. The EU and its member states look forward to continue playing an active role in contributing to the full realization of the International Decade's objectives in an effective and collaborative way at the local, national and international levels. This second regional meeting provides an excellent opportunity to take stock of the progress made in this regard, and the EU looks forward to a fruitful exchange and dialogue among all stakeholders. Let me conclude by recalling the wise words of Nelson Mandela. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin, or his background, or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Madam. I will now give the floor to the Netherlands. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to all the previous speakers for the statements. My delegation would first of all like to align itself with the statement as just delivered by the colleague of the European Union. We remain strongly opposed to all forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia and related intolerance. And in the framework of the implementation of the decade, the Netherlands has taken a number of concrete steps which we would like to share with you today. Madam Chair, the Dutch launching of the UN decade took place in October 2016. And by means of a letter to Parliament, the then Ministers of Social Affairs and Foreign Affairs informed Parliament about the plans for the national implementation. Dutch activities during the decade have served and will serve to step up measures to tackle racism in the Netherlands in line with and further to the National Interministerial Action Plan against discrimination in general. Implementation will also respect the principle of Dutch anti-discrimination policy, namely that all measures to prevent discrimination should benefit all citizens, but that targeted measures may be taken in cases where this is deemed necessary or justified. The focus of activities will, inter alia, be decided on the basis of an analysis of the problems encountered by people of African descent in the Netherlands. These activities will complement general measures aiming to promote inclusion and a sense of belonging. Our approach aims to be comprehensive. The government, under the coordination of the Ministry of Social Affairs and Labour, civil society and social partners all have a very important role to play. And in a similar vein, our national implementation provides a lot of space for initiatives coming from civil society. Various roundtable meetings have been organized with the creative sector, NGOs, interest groups, scientists, youth and others. And for this purpose, valuable themes and ideas have been collected for activities which are important for the national implementation of the decade. Madam Chair, our national implementation follows the 3 pillars of the decade: recognition, justice and development. And while many of these activities already implemented are to some extent cross-cutting, the majority of them mostly link up with the pillar of recognition. So we look forward to sharing some concrete examples of this implementation with you under the recognition panel discussion later today. We believe and we hope that this meeting will allow us to share experiences and best practices to see where we can learn from each other in our attempts to do better. Thank you.
Thank you for that statement. Сейчас слово имеет la Fédération.
I now give the floor to the Russian Federation. The Russian Federation. Sir. Thank you, Madam Chair. 16 years ago in Durban, the international community made an important step towards developing common approaches to combating racism, racial discrimination and xenophobia. These decisions were difficult, but this was a breakthrough that inspired in many people the hope that racism can be overcome. Since Durban, a lot in the world has changed, but racism, ethnic and religious intolerance have unfortunately not gone away. Globalization, the global economic crisis, conflicts and other negative global trends fully affect people of African descent as well, including those living in Europe, Central Asia and North America. Today, in the 21st century, they are subject to multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination. They continue to face racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia and intolerance, including in their violent forms. Russia supported the proclamation in 2014 of the International Decade of People of African Descent. We see this General Assembly decision as a major milestone on the path towards restoring justice for those with roots on the African continent. We support the creation of the Forum for People of African Descent, which will ensure the broad participation of civil society. We also express support for the process of developing the relevant declaration. In our opinion, it could reflect the specific situations of Africans in different regions of the world, first and foremost in Europe and North America. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
We now have on the speakers list Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam. We thank the OSCHR for organizing this regional meeting as planned in the program of activities of the International Decade for People of African Descent endorsed by the UN General Assembly Resolution 69/16 of 2014. We are of the view that historical injustices against African nations have undeniably contributed to the poverty and the underdevelopment, marginalization, social exclusion, economic disparities that people of African descent face today in many parts of the world. We are dismayed that those injustices and manifestations of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance still continue to pose serious challenges to full realization of human rights and fundamental freedoms of people of African descent. We believe that it has become a strong moral obligation for all of us to take appropriate and effective measures to hold and reverse the lasting consequences of those injustices African nations have endured throughout history. As a firm believer in the importance of education for sustainable development, Azerbaijan has throughout its history provided every opportunity for the people of African descent to study in Azerbaijan, with financial assistance of both the government and the charity organizations. As a part of our international effort, I wish to underline that in the 35th session of the HRC, Azerbaijan was pleased to join the core group putting forward the resolution on the consideration of the elaboration of a draft declaration on the promotion and full respect of human rights of people of African descent, together with Brazil, Costa Rica, and the African group. In conclusion, I wish all of you an interesting and successful meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for that statement. Is there any other member state that wishes to take the floor at this point? If there are none, I have a suggestion to make. We're way, way, way behind time. We have, okay, well, let me just finish this. I see Tunisia wants to take the floor, but okay, then you have the floor, then I'll make my suggestion after you speak. You have the floor, madam.
Thank you, Chair. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the African Group. The African Group welcomes the regional meeting and spares no efforts in ensuring that at all times assumes and provides leadership of the global agenda for the elimination of all scourges of racism and welcomes the opportunity for committed engagement on this agenda. Madam Chairperson, there is no day that passes by that spares us from aberrant images wherein human life is not valued and at worst undermined. We must at all costs condemn these wanton acts of brutality and ask ourselves the probing questions of why should this happen under our watch. We have noted that whilst progress has been recorded in the implementation of the DDPI, much still needs to be done. We encourage all member states to spare no effort in the implementation of the ideals of the DDPI as we forge ahead in the light against racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. We must aspire to make an impactful difference as we mark International Decade of the People of African Descent. It should needed be a decade that brings into the fore and sharp focus the plight of the people of African descent wherever they are in the world. A decade that should in the main brings about change and improves the lives of people of African descent. The African Group reiterates the call, consistent with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to ensure the promotion of human dignity and equality for all and to eliminate racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. Furthermore, in marking the International Decade of the People of African Descent, the group welcomes the determination and the commitment expressed in achieving in our lifetime the Sustainable Development Goals. It is by the implementation of these goals that we can bring sense to the desire of leaving no one behind as we push towards sustainable development by all. In this regard, we urge all member states to accelerate the implementation of all the activities envisaged in the program of activities of the decade. Chairperson, in conclusion, we emphasize that political will to address comprehensively by all available measures the various forms and manifestations of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance, and the provision of adequate remedies to the victims must be a priority for all states. I thank you.
Statement. Now we are already 10 minutes, 40 minutes behind time. And we have our first panel on recognition. We have registered 24 civil society organizations. What I would suggest, and my apologies in advance, is that we go on to the next panel discussion and we take the speakers from civil society as appropriate under the three different panels that we are going to have. I apologize for this because otherwise we are never going to go on to the different panels. So while recognizing this, the other thing that is also important, I would request every speaker who has registered here to provide a hard copy of their statements to the Secretariat, and then they will have an opportunity during the course of today and tomorrow to make the contents of their statements known under the various panel headings. I apologize for that, but there's no way we are going to move on to any of the panels if we go on, continue at this pace with the general statements. So on that note, I would now have to thank the opening address speakers very much for their interventions, and at this point to invite our panelists for the first panel on recognition to take their place on the podium. Have we got all the panelists? Because now I'm getting nervous.
Sorry, Ambassador.
Okay, I'm moderator. I am demoted to moderator. It's okay. Yeah. I'm going to use that. How do I get this on? How do I get this on? Oh, it's on. It's on? Distinguished delegates, the major objective of the decade is to ensure the right to full enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms by people of African descent in all parts of the world, as recognized by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other international instruments. The specific objectives set for the decade are to strengthen action and cooperation at national, regional, and international levels for the full enjoyment of economic, social, cultural, civil, and political rights by people of African descent and their full and equal participation in all aspects of society. 2, promote a better understanding and greater respect for diverse heritage, cultures, and contributions of people of African descent in the development of societies. And 3, adopt and strengthen the legal framework at the national, regional, and international levels in accordance with the Declaration and Program of Action of Durban and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination and ensure their implementation. The decade also symbolizes the will of the international community in making known a tragedy whose deep expressions have indelibly marked relations between people from different parts of the world. It provides an opportunity to reflect on the discourse, systems, and factors that led to the deportation and dehumanization of millions of human beings. The recognition of cultural, economic, political, and scientific contributions of people of African descent in the countries where they live, and finally, the acknowledgement that populations of African descent are victims of persistent racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance should receive special attention. But I also believe with many that if slavery and the slave trade in all regions of the world mobilize several nations, the memory of the crime can today, in a reverse movement, bring nations together and illuminate irreversible connections that were created among people, ensuring that a part of the history of a society, of its identity, was written beyond the seas in other countries and is inseparable from others because our destinies are connected. This message is vital today to help us live together in our multicultural societies, and it is precisely the message of the International Decade for People of African Descent. The International Decade offers an operational framework for encouraging nations to reduce, if not eliminate, social injustices inherited from history and of which people of African descent are still victims, to fight against racial prejudice and discrimination and promote the rich common heritage of a tragic history. The program of activities for the International Decade for People of African Descent noted that some countries have taken the initiative of regretting or expressing remorse or presenting apologies for their role in slavery and the transatlantic slave trade, and called upon all those that have not yet contributed to restoring the dignity of the victims to find appropriate ways to do so. The program of activities also called for increased educational efforts to avoid falsification of historical facts, including giving recognition to the victims and their descendants through the establishment of memorial sites in countries that profited from or were responsible for slavery. through knowledge of the cultural wealth of Africa and its diaspora, through highlighting the contribution of people of African descent to human civilization, we can counter racism. Conveying the history of peoples is essential for building peace and mutual understanding. Through the design of textbooks and educational materials, we can convey the historical truth about the slave trade, slavery, and colonialism, and show how these tragedies have shaped the modern societies in which we live. Through remembrances, we can prevent stigmatization and build a culture of peace. The International Decade should recall, under the recognition pillar, issues, facts, characters, and key dates of history that is above all a universal quest for freedom and respect. Freedom and equality are valid only if they apply to all, as outlined in Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Also, this International Decade, far from being only for people of African descent, is addressed to all those who recognize themselves in the cultural heritage and contributions these people have made to modern societies. To discuss these and other matters on the subject of recognition, the first theme of the decade, we have a distinguished panel here today. The panel consists of Mr. Ahmed Weed, member of the Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent, Ms. Nellie Smith, President of the International Scientific Committee for UNESCO Slave Route Project, Resistance, Liberty, Heritage, Mr. Pastor Murilo Martinez, member of the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and Ms. Elizabeth Caneza, President of the Caneza Initiative for Dialogue and Empowerment. So I will first give the floor to Mr. Ahmed Weed. And before we continue our work, allow me to inform you that this event is being live streamed via OHCHR YouTube channel, and we welcome remote participation through OHCHR's other social media channels, including Facebook and Twitter, using hashtag African Descent and hashtag Fight Racism. I would also like to inform you that at 1 p.m. there will be in this same room the launch of the Afro foodie project, an OHCHR-sponsored blog on the heritage and cultural contribution of people of African descent. This will be followed by refreshments offered in room 27, where an open space discussion entitled Towards a Draft Declaration on the Promotion and Full Respect of Human Rights for People of African Descent will take place from 1:25 to 3 p.m. So I now give the floor to our first speaker, Mr. Ahmed Weed. Mr. Ahmed Weed, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen.
Everybody is good.
It is an honor for me to address you on behalf of the Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent. We are gathered here today because of our collective commitment to the principle...
Microphone for the speaker, please.
...to the principle of non-discrimination and our pledge to combat racial discrimination. The challenge is a real one, as despite guarantees in international and national law, and despite efforts by the international community, we are confronted with the reality that racism, racial discrimination, Afrophobia, xenophobia, and related intolerance pervades every corner of the global landscape. In 2013, the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination in General Recommendation 35 stated, the prevalence of racist hate speech in all regions of the world continues to represent a significant contemporary challenge for human rights. We have been witnessing the steady rise of far-right populist sentiments worldwide and political parties with their brand of racism and xenophobia. We saw the images and heard the racist chants in Charlottesville. White Europe of brotherly nations, pure Poland, white Poland, and refugees get out were just some of the racist and xenophobic banners and slogans on display at Poland's Independence Day March. This shows that racism and other forms of related intolerance have no country of origin, and as such, ridding the world of such scourge will require global solutions. Throughout the diaspora, people of African descent continue to suffer from multiple aggravated or intersecting forms of discrimination. Many have lost the basic right to their legal identity, and as such remain invisible in laws, legislation, and policies. They are denied recognition and have been subjected to the ideology of racism that demonized and denigrated all things African. More worryingly, racism and racial discrimination continue to blight the futures of Afro descendants worldwide. The recognition of people of African descent as a distinct group is a key step to increase their visibility and respect for their culture, identity, history, and heritage. States are called upon to ensure that textbook and other educational materials reflect historical facts accurately as they relate to past tragedies and atrocities, in particular the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, and colonialism, so as to avoid stereotypes and the distortion or falsification of these historic facts. Ladies and gentlemen, people of African descent worldwide will continue to be invisible if their history and contributions to the development of modern civilization are not properly documented and made known to all. The goals of the international decade will not be achieved when states continue to devalue the history and memory of Africans. In fact, the noticeable trend is a suggestion from some states that Afro-descendants should forget the past injustices meted out to the 30 million African men, women, and children who were trafficked across the Atlantic Ocean. Just recently, it was reported in the Jamaica Gleaner that the British Minister of State with responsibility for the Caribbean, the Commonwealth, and the United Nations, Lord Tariq Ahmed, stated, and I quote, "I think it is not important looking back in history. It's about looking forward," end quote. He further suggested, and I quote, "It would be better for Jamaica to look ahead and to maximize its potential through robust trade rather than to peer into history," end quote. The minister, it seemed, was echoing the sentiments of the former British Prime Minister David Cameron, who, in his speech to Jamaica's Parliament in 2015, suggested it was time for the Jamaican people to move on and not look back at the past. I find this interesting that the comments are coming from leaders of one of the top three countries that benefited from the enslavement and exploitation of Africans, and in whose current economies there are companies and families that can be directly traced to the profits gained from the transatlantic trade. Contrary to the sentiments posited by both men, the international decade instead strongly calls for a critical re-examination of the impact of slavery on the future of people of African descent, and using the outcome of that analysis to inform policies and programs for sustainable development in the diaspora. Their disparagement of historical observations have not been equitably displayed. Compare the recent celebration of Remembrance Day in the UK. Each November, the United Kingdom honors the heroic efforts, achievements, and sacrifices that were made in past wars. Remembrance Sunday is also marked by events such as memorial services, church services, and parades. A national commemoration takes place at Whitehall in central London, and monuments have been built in their memory. The building of these monuments is recognition of the contribution of those who served in the wars. So we must ask, why should the people of Jamaica and the Caribbean be called upon to forget their forefathers and foremothers, those brave freedom fighters who fought against the injustices of slavery? Why should the people of Jamaica and the Caribbean be called upon to forget their history, while those that impose that history are not being called upon to recall and acknowledge the role they played in forging it, as well as the responsibilities and accountability in addressing the legacies of that history. Recognition is reparation, recognition is reconciliation, and recognition is healing. Ladies and gentlemen, the disavowal of the past is an active process. People of African descent will continue to face systemic discrimination and invisibility for as long as there are systems, structures, and government mechanisms that devalue the impact that history plays on the development of people of African descent. Member states, the United Nations system, and all who are here today bear a tremendous responsibility to ensure that future generations live in a world free of the scourge of racism and its manifestation in our current concerted efforts to maintain peace and justice. The commitments made in Durban, in the Durban Declaration, and the program of activities for the International Decade will only be words if member states fail to adopt them and to take positive actions to create equal opportunities for victims of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. Their value depends wholly on our courage, will, and determination to honor them and give them meaning. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reid, for that statement. I think the point that you make is quite clear. Why should we forget? And I would say no more. I would give the floor now to our next panelist, which is the next speaker on my list is Miss Nelly Schmidt, President of the International Scientific Committee for UNESCO's Slave Root Project, Resistance, Liberty, Heritage. You have the floor, Madam.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'd first of all like to thank the High Commissioner for Human Rights and Mr. Mactan Ndoye for having invited me to join you today. My aim in this brief presentation will be to point out some areas for thought, for work, and to go into greater detail on the theme of recognition of people of African descent. And I'll clarify that here I'm speaking as a historian, a researcher at the CNRS in Paris, and also as a member of the International Scientific Committee of the Slave Root Project of UNESCO. The themes of this project, that is run by Mr. Ali Musai, head of the History and Memory for Dialogue section of UNESCO and coordinator of the Slave Root Project, are of course an integral part of the specific aspect of recognition in the International Decade, because it is chiefly historical research, and recognizing, acknowledging this past, its consequences and impacts that are the work of the project and the scientific committee. History is therefore at the foundations of the Slave Root Project, which was created in 1994. I would at the outset like to underscore the importance of the creation of this project and the approach driven by Mr. Doudou Dieng, that is putting history at the heart of the project, which may seem obvious now, but which certainly wasn't at the time, indeed far from it. And it is still today not always, as we have just seen, a part of European historiography. It's also at every level of education that we can assess the remaining difficulties and persistent difficulties faced by research, the dissemination and spread of that research. It should be noted that the framework of UNESCO itself brings with it a certain logic of work in openness, comparison, and the international impetus for research that is unique and particularly precious. Since the 1960s and 70s, and all the more so since 1994, the historiography of human trafficking and slavery and the resistance to which it gave rise, and the abolition of those, and then the results of that has developed considerably in every region of the world. There are many causes of this, and here I will just mention the creation of national or international programs, an increase in discussion and exchange, but also the digitization of archives, which makes it easier for people to do research at a distance, remotely, as well as the growing role of the media in raising awareness and spreading information concerning contemporary forms of slavery that increases public interest in the slave systems before the 20th century without conflating the two. I'll briefly refer to the transmission and dissemination of results and data achieved from historical results, which is the key to recognition and acknowledgement. When historic research on these subjects that I've just mentioned accelerates and produces more results, the issue of transmitting and disseminating those results is raised at every cultural level globally, and also gives rise to another question, that of the distinction between history and memory. And this is where the role and problem of commemorations comes into play. The Slave Route Programme has provided significant resources for the transmission of this recognition through publications, films, exhibitions, collaborating with the school network that is associated to UNESCO as part of the education sector. These initiatives abound, and I encourage you to go to the Slave Route website to look at this. It contains a great deal of data and information about what we currently have and what is currently being done. I would also note the latest achievements, such as the DVD, Slave Route, A Global Vision, that has a film, some synthesis texts, a quiz and some pedagogical tools. And there's a pedagogical film, the Slave Route Project, the Instant of Resistance, or the Moment of Resistance. The proclamation of the International Decade of Persons of African Descent was, of course, an opportunity to pursue these programs and build upon these achievements. I would, for example, mention the publication of the collective work entitled Slavery, Resistance and Abolition, Plural Perspectives, which brings together some 20 contributions from members of the Scientific Committee with the active support which is published with the active support of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And this is a work that highlights the state of research on the themes of the program. And then there was the publication of an agenda for 10 years devoted to the decade, which had a specifically historic view in mind. One of the key concerns of the project is also to draw a link between the use of written documents, oral archives, and archaeological research, and those of other accounts, such as stories, songs, musical or artistic expression, or indeed some literary works. This is an enormous piece of work. A lot still needs to be done. It's by definition pluridisciplinary and requires partnerships to function. One constant piece of work of the project is also the links with museums devoted to human trafficking and slavery, as well as promoting sites and places of history and memory, whether they be officially recognized or not, whether they be well pointed out or not, whether they have historical studies and are disseminated to the broader public. Regarding places of history and memory, I would like to tell you that the Slave Route Project is preparing to launch next week a sort of register of these sites, of these places, entitled The Heritage of Slavery, a guide for the managers of memory places and routes of memory. And this offers comments and recommendations, as well as a list of historical places of human trafficking originating in Africa, slavery, resistance, and abolition. Among the achievements of the program in this area, I would note the recent recognition as a slave route site, and then as a site on the Heritage of Humanity of UNESCO list of the Valongo Quay in Rio de Janeiro, which was the most significant landing spot for prisoners deported from Africa to Brazil. And I'll remind you that this represented around 40% of the transatlantic slave trade. In the same vein, there's the upcoming partnership of the Slave Route Project with the National Committee of the United States, of the International Council for Monuments and Sites, and the Thomas Jefferson Foundation in Charlottesville. And this is to organize an international symposium in 2018 on the subject of new approaches to interpreting and representing slavery in museums and sites. And after this summary presentation of what the Slave Route Project is allowing us to do and disseminate, I will now come to some areas that are still ripe for exploitation when it comes to recognition, where some work needs to be done, concluded, and constantly renewed. First of all, the trafficking in human beings and slavery itself. It must be pointed out that a large part of the realities of these phenomena remain inaccessible. Archives, sites, and archaeology can't tell us everything. Contemporary protagonists in these events have hushed up some parts of this history. We are coming up against a plurisecular law of silence and an effective policy of forgetting the past. And in this task, it should be pointed out that each generation makes its contribution to this work and to the critique and the construction of history. On the subject of the phenomena of resistance, having them taken into account by contemporaries and then by historians, I would here point out, for example, that the attitude of slavery abolitionists themselves, who from the 18th century described human trafficking from Africa and the slave system as a crime against humanity, but who, for the most part, for more than 4 centuries of the transatlantic slave trade, for example, remained unaware or at least underestimated the resistance shown by this, incessant resistance by slaves, or indeed the ambiguous attitude of the plantation owners and the economic interests at stake. On the subject of abolition, the analysis of different modalities of suppressing slavery and its consequences, we could say that assessing the effects of resistance to slavery on the one hand and the actions of abolitionists on the other, as surprising as this may seem, continues to be subject to debate among historians. And lastly, the last example of an area that still could be developed, which I'll point out today, is new colonial policies put in place at the abolition period, which also require work. The colonial powers are indeed trying to re-establish the disappeared framework of slavery, maintaining order and full social control. And this has been done through measures that rack up everywhere over several decades. I'll come now to the links between the history of human trafficking, the history of slavery, abolition, and the history of rights. On top of the history of human trafficking and slavery, we should also highlight the history of justice at the national and international levels and the role that that played in building and legitimizing the legislation of trafficking and slavery. I'd also mention the influence that justice systems specific to colonial powers can influence. Some judges may, for example, note the influence of the repressive judicial regimes of colonies on the history of the justice of colonial powers themselves. Historians and lawyers still have a great amount of space for collaboration when it comes to reparations to slavery. To come back now to the role of the Slave Route Project during this decade, I would point out the significant work that is being done to edit Volume 9 of the General History of Africa on the one hand, and also the publication of a pedagogical version in several volumes for teachers and pupils aged 10 to 18, and then also a version for higher education. And this will be accompanied by a set of pedagogical materials. To conclude, I would like to once again underscore the following. The inaccessible share of this history is chiefly made up of archives and the expression of the dominant parties, official archives, government and colonial archives. And then there are often all too few accounts of slavery. These are often fabricated, based on oral testimonies by abolitionist committees, and also sometimes they are authentically written by former slaves themselves, or indeed they sometimes simply don't exist, and this is the case for the French colonies. I would also like to underscore the necessary involvement of politicians when it comes to heritage at risk and the need to protect it. There have been close links in history between the fight against slavery in all its forms and the recognition of this struggle and the history of human rights defense. And I will conclude by summing up the ways in which the Slave Route Program can, I believe, make a robust contribution to the recognition process, a process of recognizing the past and the identity of persons of so-called African descent. Firstly, there's the recognition of this history itself, then there's the recognition of the new contributions of related research. And here I would underscore that the shadowy part of what we don't know yet about this story, about this history, is much greater than what we do know, that many documents of all sorts still remain to be used around the world where these phenomena existed. Then there is the recognition of the contributions of people of African descent in different areas of knowledge at the global level. And lastly, the recognition of the consequences of discrimination, the policies of conscious forgetting, the direct trauma, but also the transgenerational trauma caused by this, including in identity research and psychological areas, psychology, and the consequences here have not been fully understood or measured. Thank you.
Let me thank Ms. Smith and also UNESCO for the remarkable work they're doing, you would agree, in terms of looking at the whole question we're talking about, recognition. The history, we need to know the history. We need to recognize the history. We need to recognize the contribution of people of African descent. We need to also recognize the consequences of discrimination. So I thank you very much, and I thank you for the work you're doing, and I do call on all those who are interested to look into some detail into the Slave Root Project and see how we ourselves could contribute to make it comprehensive and to make sure that, I think you said, we still have a great deal more to bring in and to make sure that it becomes truly comprehensive. So I thank you very much for that. And without much further ado, I'll give the floor to our next panelist, Mr. Pastor Murillo Martinez, who's a member of the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. You have the floor, sir.
Muy buenas tardes.
Very good afternoon. Madam Chair, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure and a source of pride for me to be here today. Given that the chairperson of our committee, the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, was already able to speak this morning and to set forward the committee's official position. Now, I shall just bring together some points of view, institutional points of view, with some personal opinions of mine, in order to highlight the critical importance that I believe is involved with the issue of people of African descent and their involvement in today's current agenda. I'll look at some challenges, some steps forward that have been taken, and I'll also highlight some proposals, many of which enjoy the committee's support. Now, yesterday, perhaps the day before yesterday, the President of the European Union reaffirmed that the world is becoming increasingly small and that the problems of Africa are also the problems of Europe. This really does highlight the interdependent nature of the issue of people of African descent. There's no doubt that the issue of people of African descent has a critical role to play for international peace and security. You can just highlight that the 200 million people of African descent who've been identified as such in the Americas, together with the 50 million people belonging to indigenous peoples, they are located in the key geographic areas when it comes to environmental sustainability of the planet. The 9 million people who die every year due to disease linked to problems of climate change and the other challenges that we're seeing when it comes to economic issues, for example, the $520 million that climate change will cost the international community in the future, the 25 million poor people who will every year experience these consequences. The people of African descent and indigenous peoples particularly of the Americas, many of them are, as I say, in key geographic areas when it comes to environmental sustainability. There's an opportunity there, and that's why this is relevant. Now, if we look at this together with the migration phenomenon that we've already talked about, and if we look at these phenomena together, migration, climate change as a cause of migration, if we look at the number of people who are currently moving and getting mobilized in the Americas and in the Caribbean as a result, for example, of the recent hurricanes and their impacts and consequences, for example, in Haiti and other places, we must then conclude that the issue of people of African descent, it plays an extremely relevant role in the international agenda. But this human mobility, this human movement also immediately reflects when it comes to the political side of things. If you look at the political side of things, the geopolitical side of things in today's world, this is really permeated by identities, by the question of identities. And if we look at this human movement and human mobility, we see that it comes across in the political dynamics in our countries, in many regions of the world, ignoring the impact of the migratory phenomenon, or, for example, not taking it into account when it comes to Brexit or other political phenomena, the elections in the United States. If we were to ignore that, then that would really not be taking into account the reality. So here, people of African descent are a significant percentage of the population. They have a significant role to play, whatever that might be. Now, this is the first invitation that I'd like to issue to you, really. It's recognition of these phenomena. If we recognize them, we also have to recognize the facts of the past, what's occurred in the past. Recently, the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, we had the ambassador of a distinguished European country. She requested us not to allude to issues of the past because it wasn't healthy to dwell on the past and to reopen these wounds. This is a country whose Minister of Foreign Affairs said to that country and said to their country that rights, talking about rights regarding a ship that was shipwrecked, and it was found in the past that there were $10 million of worth around that ship, and it was asked that this country have access to that ship. 360 nationals of that country had perished on this ship which had gone down, and which therefore belonged to the country. And so here we're talking about assets when there are assets, but we don't want to talk about liabilities. We don't want to recognize that slavery and the transatlantic slave trade are still relevant today in different regions, in different countries. The children of the victims of survivors of the transatlantic slave trade are still experiencing the consequences of that phenomenon, and that's what I want to stress. Now, I'd also like to highlight that, of course, important progress has been made. Many countries have made progress when it comes to recognizing the rights of people of African descent. They have adopted laws with quotas or affirmative action measures, which are, for example, countries like Uruguay, Ecuador, Colombia, Brazil, and others. But at the same time, the main challenges remain. This is why in a country like Brazil, where the main cause of death of young people is murder, homicide, and as the Senator of Brazil just said recently, 29,000 of these young people are part of the population of people of African descent. So a large percentage of violent deaths involve people of African descent as victims. So this has huge consequences. And this would lead us to invite Europe, to other leaders of the world, to consider the possibility that this declaration that was adopted at the first regional meeting of the decade in Brasilia, where states parties decided to promote positive actions, affirmative actions, to adopt a declaration in favour of people of African descent to ensure that the International Decade see the holding of the Fourth World Conference against racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia and other related forms of intolerance, but that also measures of reparation and remedy be adopted for people of African descent, on the understanding that if we look at the fully documented facts, like they have been with people of African descent, that victims are physically here, they're physically still alive, and the consequences continue to affect this population. And this is a vital opportunity to move forward along the path to recognition, justice, and development. Madam Chair, I'd like to really echo what colleagues have said and what the chair of the Working Group on People of African Descent has said, to invite states parties. It's a shame that there are no ambassadors present, or rather there are some countries who we've seen high-level presence, but we're delighted to see ambassadors here, we're delighted to see ambassadors present here today to really celebrate the importance of the International Decade. Thank you.
And thank you, sir, for that intervention. I now give the floor to Ms. Elizabeth Caneza, President of the Caneza Foundation for Dialogue and Empowerment. You have the floor, madam.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. People of African descent, it's a good thing that we're meeting in Geneva today, for no place could give greater expression to our message of recognition, justice, and development than the United Nations and Geneva, the home of the international human rights architecture. Many before us have given all the head, the sweat, and the lives in the struggle for global recognition and for creating a universal alliance of all members of the African family. Today, we stand in for them. Today, we pay tribute in the premises of the United Nations under the umbrella of the International Decade for People of African Descent. During my presentation, I wish to highlight some key points that we should consider under the pillar of recognition for this decade. Number one, expanding the definition of people of African descent to match the complete experience of diasporization. As a student of the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, I dare to say that its definition of people of African descent is too narrow to depict the current reality of people of African descent, especially in Europe. It is recommended hereby to give the definition a broader sense, in that explicit recognition is also given to people of African descent that are referred to as people of African descent of the second and third generation of diasporization, African migrants and their descendants, as well as refugees. By doing so, the emphasis of Durban on the victims of enslavement and the transatlantic slave trade is not made weaker, as many argue. Rather, it strengthens the argument that the main causes for the contemporary forms of racism and discrimination have continuities into the present day and put people of African descent at risk. Studies show that it's dangerous to be a person of African descent regardless of your particular experience of diasporization. Limiting the definition entirely to the experience of enslavement would make invisible those people of African descent in the diaspora whose ancestors were brought here under different conditions, often conditions that cannot be traced back. And it would leave out those people of African descent who came here as migrants or refugees, but who experienced the same consequences in de facto racial discrimination. Number two, implementing recognition at home. While international human rights were framed within the system of the United Nations, the implementation must be within national law, at the national level. Hence, we can say that recognition starts at home, and it must be implemented at home. It's in streets like Louisiana and Charlottesville, the banlieues in Paris, the schools in Toronto, community centers in Nova Scotia, police officers in Cologne that the change must arrive. It's the legacy of Jim Crow laws, the legacy of the lynching of people of African descent, the legacy of colonizing not only hectares of land, but the body, soul, and mind of entire people, and making them believe that they are nothing and that there will be forever nothing. This is what we must fight. In Germany, where I come from, For decades, there was not a mention of the black population as a vulnerable group in official documents. The very existence of black population was completely invisible in most public discourse and policy papers. On a regular basis, people of African descent would be attacked openly in public with the consequence of death, but there were no policy, there were no measures. It was after the launch of the decade that the government included the terms people of African descent and black people in the new National Action Plan. We must remind states of its obligation under international law and their commitment to this decade to recognize us, to recognize people of African descent and our experience of racism. Number 3, strengthening the role of civil society under decade. We have an important role under decade as civil society, and I came to Geneva to remind all of us here that we cannot delegate this role. Some of us try sometimes to delegate it. We cannot delegate it because we have a responsibility. We have a mandate. We too represent the people. We too must act in the interest of them. And we share these characteristics with member states, which is the reasons why I strongly believe that during this decade, we must intensify the cooperation between state and civil society. In Germany, Netherlands, and Switzerland, we have successfully built bridges to our governments and are now seeing the positive results of these partnerships. I'm also very delighted that our colleagues in Canada made significant progress in cooperating with the government, and it is my hope that this cooperation will lead to the implementation of the decade. To the people who ask, how can the decade benefit me? I ask back, how can you benefit the decade? Admittedly, this decade is not perfect. Still, I count myself to those who strongly support it. And I ask you, all of you, to embrace this decade with us. I believe that our colleagues from the United Nations Office for Human Rights have this belief in the decade. For we wouldn't be here today if they wouldn't believe in the decade. For as you know, there was the decision of member states not to host this regional meeting. The United Nations came in to host these meetings. And I want to thank the High Commissioner and all member states. We say to you, thank you for hosting this regional meeting. In summary, it is recommended to, number 1, develop a broader scope for the definition of people of African descent. Number 2, implement recognition at home by putting international law in practice and recognizing people of African descent as vulnerable group. Number 3, strengthening the role of civil society and promote cooperation with governments. Without this cooperation, this decade cannot succeed. It is a good thing that we are meeting in Geneva. This is history in making. For people of African descent have never been here before in the size and with the exposure we have today. Let us never forget that not so long time ago, a person who looked like me could not set foot in this building. Let us never forget, Madam Chair, that not so long ago, a person of my skin color, of my descent, could not speak up, could not speak to such congregation, was not allowed to speak up about the experience he or she makes. Therefore, seeing all of us here, member states, civil society, international organizations, communities, united here in Europe, a continent with a historical relevance for our struggle against racism, to discuss and find solutions for the pressing human rights concerns of people of African descent, regardless of our differences, because we have them. Seeing all of us here fills me with an incredible hope, and it fills me with great pride. And I'm proud to close by recognizing each one of us, echoing the spirit of this decade. I am somebody, you are somebody, and I am because you are. Thank you.
Let me thank Ms. Kaneza for that powerful statement. And I think also to recognize that 3 countries in Europe have actually launched the program of activities for people of African descent, Germany, Netherlands, and Switzerland. I want to congratulate them. And we look forward to other countries in Europe and the rest of this region we're dealing with today to do the same. Thank you very much. Before I open the floor, and now I would like, I think, Canada, the Honorable Michael Coteau, Minister responsible for anti-racism and Minister of Children and Youth Services in the province of Ontario in Canada, has sent us a video message. So we would now listen to the video message before we go on to the general debate. It's starting? Yes. Yes. You have to put your earphones on.
It's not coming through.
It's not? Okay. Technical problem. Well, while we're getting the technical problem fixed...
In North America.
Okay, all right.
Under the international...
Can we start again?
Greetings to everyone at the second regional meeting for Europe, Central Asia, and North America, under the International Decade of People of African Descent. My name is Michael Coteau, and I'm the Minister responsible for anti-racism and the Minister of Children and Youth Services in the province of Ontario, Canada. I'm sorry I can't join you in person, but I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you through this video. In February of this year, the Government of Ontario recognized the UN's International Decade of People of African Descent, and we're doing great work to support that recognition. More than half of Canada's Black population lives here in Ontario, and the majority of them live in Toronto. Yet Black Canadians are still among the most marginalized and discriminated against groups in our society. Recognizing the decade is just one of our ways the government is moving towards taking concrete action to recognize systemic racism and challenging it head-on. Earlier this year, we passed the Anti-Racism Act, the first of its kind in Canada. This legislation enables us to implement race-based data collection, as well as an anti-racism impact assessment tool to anticipate and remove unconscious biases in our institutions that our citizens rely upon. We're also the first jurisdiction in North America to create the Anti-Racism Directorate, which works to address and prevent racism in government policy, legislation, programs, and services. Through the Directorate, we created a 3-year anti-racism strategic plan, which includes the recognition that Ontario's Black populations experience especially critical forms of systemic racism. Our research shows that dropout rates are higher for Black youth. They're less likely to apply for post-secondary education. They're more likely to be unemployed, and Black youth are overrepresented in both child welfare and the justice system, which is why my ministry created the Ontario Black Youth Action Plan, with the goal of eliminating disparities in schools, post-secondary education, and employment within 10 years. Our anti-racism work, which differs from other approaches that focus on multiculturalism and diversity, actively confronts the unequal power dynamic between groups and the structures that sustain it. I applaud the UN's decade's call on the international community to combat systemic racism, racial discrimination, and xenophobia that affects people of African descent. I'm honored to have been able to answer that call. While there's still much work left to be done, I'm proud to live in a province that is taking bold action to eliminate systemic racism and to build a more just society. Thank you.
Can I talk to him? He won't hear me. No, I'd like to thank a delegate in the room from Canada, through you, to thank the minister for that most reassuring message. I believe this is the sort of action we are looking at under recognition. I think one of the things he mentioned, which was particularly noteworthy, is getting the data. Because if you do not know what you need to address, you cannot address it. So I think that's a very good start, and we are very reassured that Canada, if only Ontario, is taking that step, and we look forward to it being extended to all the provinces, even if there are less Africans, people of African descent in the other provinces. So I thank you very much Canada for that. I'll now give the floor to I think I have two member states on the list, and then we go on to the civil society. So I'll give the floor now to Netherlands. Did you want to say something under this? Yes. Netherlands, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to the panelists for the interesting contributions. Under the Decades Pillar of Recognition, we would like to underline, as I said before, a number of activities which have thus far been initiated or implemented in the Netherlands. And as mentioned also earlier, many of these activities are to some extent cross-cutting across the three pillars, but we believe that for the benefit of the meeting, they are probably best placed under the recognition team, which is the reason why we choose to intervene under this specific agenda item. Under this pillar, we include efforts aimed at knowledge of and research about inclusion, exclusion and discrimination, and this includes the awareness of and countering negative stereotypes in the promotion of dialogue. It also includes efforts to increase resilience among communities, as well as attention for contributions, heritage and culture of people of African descent. In this light, Madam Chair, the Free University of Amsterdam has carried out in September of this year a comprehensive research study focused on exclusion of people of African descent in the Netherlands, dating back to the 70s of the 20th century, and this study aims to provide new perspectives on this issue. This study is available online, and we are of course happy to share the outcomes with anyone who might be interested. Madam Chair, let me highlight a number of other relevant initiatives, and maybe also good to say that we are of course happy to provide interested colleagues with a full list of activities. In 2016, the Ministry of Social Affairs and Employment has created a dedicated website, www.africandescent.nl, and the aim of this website is to get a more complete picture of the network of societal organizations and individuals actively involved with work related to the decade. And furthermore, the Ministry also uses this website to promote the exchange of information about the implementation of the decade in the Netherlands. In the same year, also in 2016, we organized the conference Learn, Participate and Connect, Decade for People of African Descent, which was a conference which focused through panel discussions, workshops, movie screenings and lectures on sharing knowledge, empowerment, cooperation and connection, and which attracted more than 600 visitors, among which, we're glad to say, the UN Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent who participated in that meeting. The Ministry of Social Affairs and Employment also made available a budget for projects in the context of the decade through a national tender. And the goal was to raise awareness with respect to racism and to increase resilience of people in communities through educational projects. Madam Chair, as said, these are only a few selected number of activities which have already taken place, but we are committed to support further civil society initiatives within the further national implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Netherlands. I'll give the floor to Germany, and after Germany, we'll start with the list of civil society organizations. Germany, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. We align with the statement of the EU, and we take the floor in this session, especially, of course, to thank Ms. Canesa for coming here from Germany and talking a little bit on the podium about the work we do on Germany in this area. I would like to reiterate our strong opposition to racism, to racial discrimination and xenophobia and any related intolerance. And I think it's very important that we meet here with civil society activists, and I would like to thank them for traveling to Geneva for this very important exchange with states that we also need here in Geneva in order to further our causes. In Germany, we follow a national action plan against racism. It outlines positions and actions to handle ideologies on inequalities and related discrimination. And among others, it especially addresses racism against people of African descent. The federal government aims to strengthen measures to combat racist crimes and racial discrimination. We will revert to the recommendations by the UN Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent in this regard. The working group has just visited Germany, and we will work with its recommendation. Thank you very much for the floor, Ms. Chair.
Thank you very much. I think Canada still wants to speak on behalf of the federal government. And please, we are looking at the time, so if you could make it short, I'll very much appreciate that. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I will pass on your regards to Minister Koto for sure. Favoriser une plus grande connaissance.
Promoting greater knowledge and a better understanding of the heritage and culture of people of African descent is at the heart of the goals of the decade. Raising awareness involves both admitting the wrongs, historical wrongs and injustices, and recognizing the exceptional contributions made in our countries by people of African descent, often in the face of adversity. People of African descent have played a leading role in building and shaping Canadian heritage and identity, and this since the arrival of Mathieu da Costa, a navigator and interpreter, at the beginning of the 17th century. However, all too few of our fellow citizens are aware of the challenges faced by Black Canadians throughout history, or indeed their significant contributions to our society. Although many learn that the Underground Railroad helped people to escape slavery during the American Civil War, few people know, for example, that people of African descent were reduced to slavery on the land that is now Canada. Few people know the names of those who fought against slavery and contributed to laying the foundations of the diverse, inclusive Canadian society of today. We are working to change that. Since 1996, the Government of Canada has each year in February officially celebrated Black History Month. Annual campaigns highlight historic figures and the key events of this history, in addition to remarkable contemporary figures, so as to recognize them and promote a greater knowledge of the culture, heritage and contributions of these Black Canadians. The theme of this year, Stories of Courage, explored historic milestones and presented remarkable figures such as Viola Desmond, who was imprisoned and fined in 1946 for having taken a seat in a section of a theatre in Nova Scotia that was exclusively reserved for white theatregoers. Ms. Desmond will feature on the 10 Canadian dollar bill from 2018, and she will be the first Canadian woman to appear on a Canadian banknote. The government has also adopted a law which will declare the 21st of January of each year Lincoln Alexander Day, in honor of the first Black parliamentarian, first Black member of Parliament in Canada, who in 1985 was also the first representative of the Queen in Canada to be from a visible minority when he was appointed the 24th Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. Each of the 10 Canadian provinces has a policy or a law which targets the full participation of all citizens and the elimination of racial discrimination. As you heard in Minister Koto's message, Ontario province is innovating to combat racial discrimination, including anti-Black racism. Thank you.
The statement made by Canada and to see all the different efforts that have been started. And we would need to encourage Canada to continue in this regard to address the problems of people of African descent. So thank you very much. I will now go on and to the first speaker on my list, on civil society list, which is the Kwanzaa Association. But before you take the floor, let me just say something. We are going to continue with the civil society list at 3 o'clock today, so the panel on justice might be slightly delayed. So, but I would encourage you that the time given is 2 minutes. So if you respect that, we can get many more speakers on our list. So I give the floor to Kwanzaa Association at this point. Thank you.
First and foremost, I would like to thank the OHCHR for this opportunity to give us the opportunity to explain our situation in Spain. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Candidatu Camaradanzo. I'm female and Black. I am just one of many voices of a great heterogeneous community that is invisibilized, criminalized, and oppressed by the Spanish state. How are we not supposed to accuse a state of practicing institutional racism if it is not capable of recognizing the violence exercised in the southern border of the country? The 15 deaths of immigrant people in the Tarajal, the lockup of hundreds of brothers and sisters, and the death of Samba Martinez in Athir, a migrant detention center. The constant persecution of the Afro community through identifications by ethnical profile. The role of the mass media in the normalization of racism. The lack of reference and opportunities of young African and Afro descendants in the laboral scope. Furthermore, we are not only oppressed for being black people, but we are also being oppressed for being female, trans, Muslim, poor people, etc. We deserve a recognition of an important problem of institutional racism in Spain, and a recognition to each and one of the individuals in the Afro community as citizens with full political and social rights. We demand more education focused in the reality of racism and other types of discrimination. End up with political violence and intimidation, and promote the empowerment of the Afro community. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that statement and for keeping within the time limits. I think your point is well taken. You speak about multiple forms of discrimination. And also, on that note, I'll call on the next speaker, which is the Virgin Island Youth Advocacy Coalition. You have the floor.
Good morning, High Commissioner, Chairperson, Special Rapporteur, other distinguished panelists, and fellow civil society activists. My name is Genevieve Whitaker, and I'm a human rights lawyer and activist from the Virgin Islands of the United States, a non-self-governing territory, a colony of the United States. And this year marks the 100-year anniversary by which Denmark sold the Danish West Indies to the United States, thereby establishing the Virgin Islands of the United States. It's an honor for me to address you today as a 2016 fellow for the Fellowship of People of African Descent, and as a co-founder and president of the Virgin Islands Youth Advocacy Coalition, a youth civics organization. As you're likely aware, we are in the third international decade for the eradication of colonialism. And as it relates to the international decade, questions surrounding the United States support and promotion of our human right to self-determination persists. Specifically, as a decade of program of activities calls for the legal frameworks for equal treatment, education espousing the notions of equality through curricula designed to promote the understanding of the contribution of people of African descent, issued this plea of support in addressing the following. Political rights issues. The United States, to the State Department, to the Department of the Interior rather, while supporting the centennial celebration, refused financial support in the draft of our last constitution, the 5th Constitution. Moreover, we remain second-class citizens, governed by Act of Congress, the revised Organic Act of 1954, which stands as our Constitution, but within that very document, we are denied full rights under the U.S. flag, and an overarching example of that inequality is the prohibition of the right to vote for the U.S. president. In terms of our cultural rights and development, there exists no systematic educational framework for the teaching of the contributions of people of African descent. Rather, the textbooks that are used in our schools have, in some instances, promoted a complete erroneous version of our own history of people of African descent. In fact, I presented a matter to the Anti-Discrimination Committee of one of our local textbooks, which portrayed an erroneous aspect of our history. And in terms of our economic development through integration, the U.S. State Department maintains the denial of the Virgin Islands membership into the regional body, the Caribbean community. In conclusion, I'm thankful for the opportunity to present before you today and to ask for your support as outlined to address issues of inequality and support for our right to develop as territorial peoples, denied fundamental rights both within the U.S. and international legal framework. Thank you.
Very much. I don't want to say you cannot clap, but it takes a few seconds of the time we have. So I think the speakers would appreciate it. It's not because this statement is not good, but because we are pressed against time. So the next speaker would be the International Association Against Torture. you have the floor. Yes.
Thank you, Chairperson. The people of African descent in the United States are victims of ethnic cleansing. In one sense, this is nothing new, but the International Decade demands a more precise definition and recognition of the current escalating criminal assault on both black life itself as well as on the quality of black life. And in that context, I found the remarks from the U.S. on the situation of black people in the United States is really like something out of the Matrix from another planet. The popular and intentionally benign expression for the forced displacement of African people around the United States is gentrification. It disguises the criminal nature of this involuntary displacement of masses of African people from the communities in which they have lived for generations to be replaced by new, largely white occupants. Varying reasons are floated for this dislocation, the free play of market forces or the natural and inevitable consequences of an expanding metropolis. But we maintain that this is not simply happenstance that governs this process, but a systemic policy of white supremacy grounded in the reality that the 21st century U.S. economy no longer has a need for surplus black labor. African people's kidnapping to and continued existence in the Western Hemisphere has been based on our ability to create profits for others. In the U.S., that is no longer the case, except for that profit generated by our slave labor in prisons. This displacement is not simply a housing issue. The erasure of black people is seen in many areas: health, education, criminal justice, employment, violation of our right to self-determination, murder by the police, the all-sided attack on our culture. The information we are receiving from NGOs throughout the diaspora show that this ethnic cleansing of people of African descent is occurring in other countries as well. It is within this historical and contemporary context that we asked the regional meeting to include this concept of ethnic cleansing in its summation of the recognition which the International Decade demands. Thank you.
Thank you for that statement. I'll now give the floor to the Drameth Institute. Drameth Institute? Yes, you have the floor, madam.
Good morning, Chairperson. Thank you for this opportunity. The International Decade for People of African Descent was born by unprecedented circumstance and serves as a memoriam for people of African descent after centuries of non-self-expression and the right to bond. As such, we are pleased that this moment sets the stage for a great opportunity to undertake useful introspection and scrutiny of our historical record. Yet we are keenly aware of the challenges facing us for the next 7 years as it relates to the decade's themes: recognition, justice, and development. We, the members of the Global Coalition of the Implementation of the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, appreciate this opportunity to take a few moments for remarks, which we had expectations to be a venue for accountability and participatory dialogue on implementing agreed programs. What we have learned throughout the Durban process is that there is no free lunch, and that civil society had to advocate and campaign for all that had been achieved in recognizing the rights of people of African descent, which is an integral part of the full and effective implementation of the DDPA. We want to express our recognition over the composition of the panels, which does not include any NGO speaker who had contributed to Durban, the 2009 Review Conference, or the 10th anniversary of the campaign for the decade to be decided. We are equally concerned over the short speaking time for NGOs. In the matter of recognition, repertory justice for people of African descent, we recognize it also means the safeguarding of cultural heritages from future damages. This includes ensuring the public spaces that are free from hostile iconography that mocks the humanity of people of African descent. In this regard, we note with profound alarm and dismay the monuments, structures, and cultural practices that continue to demean the humanity of people of African descent in the streets of New York, the American South, and throughout Europe, with images reminiscent of a violent past. In conclusion, we call on member states in the Human Rights Council to adopt a multi-year outreach program for the DDPA, information and mobilization, as requested by the General Assembly. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I will now give the floor to the Collectif des Femmes Africaines du Haït.
Oui, mon nom est Annette Tinois.
Yes, my name is Annette Tinois. I'm of Cameroonian origin and a migrant in Belgium. I'm the International Secretary of the Network of Afro-Descendant Women. My country, Cameroon, was colonized by Germany and then by France and the United Kingdom. I migrated to Belgium, but was also deported to, but my predecessors were deported to the United States as slaves. So I'm connected to all of these countries. My history is connected to these countries. I'm surprised that I be described as a poor person now, and I'm surprised that recognition will involve first and foremost the recognition of this decade. And I'm surprised that at the European level, the European Union does not recognize the decade. We've formally written to them on this. I'm happy that the permanent representative of the European Union is here because this is an unmitigated failure. How many countries recognize the decade of people of African descent? None of them. So this is an unprecedented failure, and we've come to present this failure to the Secretary General so that concrete actions can be taken so that the rights of persons of African descent can be respected around the world. There can be no development without economic development. No social development will be possible without economic development. How many investment funds have been put in place to finance the economic projects of people of African descent? So many people saying around the world that we are poor. It is only through doing this that our social development and our recognition will be achieved. That's the way the balance of power falls in the world. So I've come here to present this failure to you, representative, and then to the representative of the European Union.
I thank the speaker. The next speaker on my list is Global African Congress UK. You have the floor.
Greetings. My name is Judy Richards. I am the Global African Congress European Rep on the International Working Committee and co-chair of the UK Global African Congress. I am also a committee member for the UK International Decade for People of African Descent Coalition Board. Over time, what seemed to be correct is no longer correct. We have to look and review and change. One of the things that we believe in Global African Congress and in IDPAD UK is the terminology. We do not like the term people of African descent. We do not talk about people of white descent, people of Chinese descent, people of Indian descent. So why are only Africans people of descent? Africans are Africans are Africans. We do not like the term Afrophobia. Nobody is scared of a haircut, but they are scared of Africans and they will discriminate against Africans. That terminology has to change. We do not like the term slavery. Everybody is born free, but some of us were enslaved, and that term needs to be adopted and respected. I am disappointed that there does not seem to be space on this programme for the Africans here to come together and discuss these issues. I know that we do not all agree with what I have said, because some of us do not speak the same language and have not had a chance to actually meet and have those discussions. We need resourcing to enable us not just to meet and discuss things here, but resources in our own countries. Some of our countries are very poor at acknowledging the needs of Africans. And if the UN cannot resource that, then others have to. We appreciate the fact that some of us have been resourced to come to this particular conference, this particular event, but more of this is needed so that all of us are able to say we speak on behalf of all of us.
I thank you for that. We can have one last speaker for this morning or afternoon already, and that's the Canesa Foundation for Dialogue and Empowerment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Canesa Foundation for Dialogue and Empowerment affirms that the human rights situation of people of African descent today is originated in history. The lack of recognition is among the main problems we face in fighting against racism. We agree with the Durban Declaration that enslavement, transatlantic slave trade, colonialism, and apartheid have ongoing consequences for Africans and people of African descent worldwide. European colonialism in African countries, especially by Germany, is rarely discussed, and if so, there is no proper rehabilitation. There is no adequate or truthful representation of the transatlantic slave trade and colonialism in schools. The image of people of African descent is disturbed by stereotypes. The effect is multidimensional racial discrimination of students of African descent in both society and academic material. Efforts to implementing recognition activities for the decade in Germany have been made primarily by the civil society. We acknowledge the government's cooperation. However, until today, there is no responsible ministry for the decade in Germany. Many NGOs in Germany achieved a great preliminary work in the field of political education on German colonialism. Academic and research material published by experts of African descent already exists in many cities. Unfortunately, there is a nationwide lack of funding for these projects. Furthermore, none of these materials are used in schools, so it does not reach students and teachers in order to educate about German colonialism and its consequences. The situation in other European states is quite similar. We demand a sustainable funding for these projects in human rights education and political education to achieve the recognition of people of African descent respectively to the goals of the decade, means to implement our visibility in society and the truthful representation of the history of enslavement and colonialism in academic history books and other sources. People of African descent are to be included as experts in the process of historical rehabilitation. This is the only way to fight stereotypes and the misrepresentation of history. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that statement. We'll start the afternoon with a continuation of the speakers list of civil society, and the first three speakers, I could give that now because it starts at 3, would be the Uganda Diaspora Europe, APP Human Rights Campaign, Le Collectif Africain, and we will kick off the afternoon session at 3 o'clock. For now, we would now go on to the launch of the Afro Foodie project, which is an OHCHR project sponsored blog on the heritage and cultural contribution of people of African descent. This would take place not in this room. In this room. So if you could just sit, it is not going to take long, and I think the launch of this particular project would be now.
Yeah, we move.
Yes, we all move. Do I move? Yes.
If you.
No, I move.
Yeah, we leave the.
Hey, how are you? Good. Good to see you again. It finally worked. Everything nice.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to it. Great.
Voilà, monsieur. Merci, monsieur. Voilà, c'est Vincent. Let's sit like between this mic. Okay, good afternoon. If you don't mind, we would like to attract your attention with a very short launch. By this launch, we would like to diversify. Okay. Okay, for those who listen to us, we would like to diversify the discussion and to present here the heritage of people of African descent. We started the project as a culinary recipe book, but then we found an organization which now share with us the collaboration and the creation of this blog. I'm here with Julien Tatin, director of the L'Indice Pensable. Maybe without delay, I will give the floor to him, and we will also show a short video about the project.
So, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you for being here today. As I'm aware, you are all having a busy day.
Please.
My name is Julien Tatin, and I am managing a rather small NGO called L'Indice Pensable, involved in promoting the art of hospitality. We have worked over a year, side by side with the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, and particularly with Yuri and his team, the Anti-Racial Discrimination Section, within the framework of the International Decade, to create a blog of recipes of the diaspora. This is the Afro Foodie project. If Afro Foodie was a recipe, its main ingredients would be the culture and the history of people of African descent. And bitter memories would taste a little sweeter. Afro Foodie started with its first contributor, Shulaika, a woman from Curacao, who shared with us the recipe of the banana shtoba. But she didn't just share the recipe, she shared the story behind it, the origins of the ingredients, and the history it carries with it. And while sharing the preparations, she also explained how fonchi, a side dish to the main preparation of the island of Curacao, was also used by her ancestors during the slavery time to heal their feet bleeding from working in the salines. On this screen, you can get a good overview of our brand new site. The logo, those 3 warm colored circles, represent the type of spices containers one would find on a food market in Africa. But they can also be interpreted as 3 appetizing saucepans. The word sauce is very important, actually. In the making of this blog, we discovered that many dishes of African origins are called by the name of their sauce, meats and starches arriving second. It took us a little while to understand this, I must say, and this questions us on the status of meat depending on where we come from. A matter quite contemporary, don't you think? Well, if you see something else coming off those 3 circles, just make sure it is related to food and to the decade, or Yuri would give me a hard time. It was interesting to notice what makes a dish unique The same dish can have slightly different taste depending on who cooks it, what utensils are used, and an even more different taste depending on where it is cooked. The 10 people who already contributed to this blog reminded us that food does not travel without changing. And that process never ends. There's always the element of interpretation, adventure, and surprise. Memories and emotions are linked, and very often someone who cooks is aiming at feeling again the taste of comfort, the smell of security, and the texture of love. Very often too, that someone feels frustrated as there is too many criteria that the long journey is preventing him or her from meeting, until he or she goes his or her own way, until he or she decides to own that recipe. All these memories, these emotions, the links, the journey, this is what made our experience with this project unique and what adds value to the blog. I invite you to read each recipe, each story carefully, and I hope your experience will be as full of emotion as mine was while putting together this website. I would like to thank my team a lot. A few of them are here today. We have Nongo from Senegal, our photographer. He does the best Thieboudienne in town. I can tell. Geraldine and Frédéric, right over here, from Switzerland, our web media designers, who are just launching their web design company. Dominique, filming us right now, also from Switzerland, who brought all his expertise from his career at the Swiss television, and also his passion to create quality movies of last year's Fellows contribution. And also Isabel, sitting over there, from Angola, who joined us more recently. She is an apprentice at L'Indispensable, and she is already making a big contribution to our work and making huge and quick progress in French. We hope that she will soon be another contributor to the Afro foodie project. So thank you very much for listening. This is now time for you, ladies and gentlemen, to join the Afro foodie website, the project, to contribute with your own recipe, your own story, and help us make this project bigger. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julian. I think that we're all ready to move on for lunch. But in room 27, there will be discussion on the prospects for the declaration on the promotion of the rights of people of African descent. I invite all of you there in just 2 minutes. Before that, we'll see a very short video about this blog. And by the room 27, there will be a food already arriving from the blog. So, thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
ay sénégalais yu nekk foofu ñoom ñoo ma jàngal togg sénégalais.
What is the African way of cooking? We don't cook because we have 10 people who are coming, but we cook with a sense of love so that everyone who comes in actually can be accommodated with the food we are preparing. And I think these values are there in the diaspora.
That this was something that was inherited from my ancestors.
Also, this is the first time I've cooked it, so...
The first time?
Yes, I usually watch my mom cook it. So yesterday, I frantically called her and said, Mom, can you tell me again the steps to make it?
I think you just go with the feeling, you know, especially if you're passionate about cooking.
I think this particular recipe transcends class, status. Everybody eats it in Barbados.
So it's something that we're proud of because it shows the innovation of using these particular ingredients that weren't native to the island, but like us who were forced migrants coming there, we are trying to make something positive of the experience.
Thank you.